snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello there, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, and I'm joined, as always, by Ben McKee, our staff writer here at RTI, and he's also, of course, the producer and co-host of the Swain Event Morning Radio Sports Talk Show. Thank you all for tuning in. If this is your first time, thank you so much for tuning in to the RTI Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. If you have an Android device, you can listen to us that way as well. We're on YouTube. Just go subscribe to our YouTube channel, and a lot of you interact with the podcast that way. We appreciate that very much. You can leave comments down below on the video if you're currently watching it. If you have anything you want to respond to as we're talking about it here on the podcast, please feel free to do so. We will either reply back to it, or we'll see it usually, like it, or reply back to it sometimes if you're asking questions. So thank you all for tuning in, and thank you for interacting with us. And Ben, we have a few things to cover here. It's off-season time for football, basketball. Well, we'll get to that in a second. Basketball's not exactly in the best spot right now, but football-wise, things are, I think as we talked about on our last podcast, things were trending upward for Tennessee on the last time we spoke, and things have only continued to kind of trend upward for Tennessee since the last time we spoke. There's been a few coaching staff changes. You've had David Johnson, of course this is older news, but David Johnson moving on to go coach at Florida State. Kevin Sherr had left Tennessee's staff to go join the New York Giants staff in the NFL, leaving Pruitt with 2 vacancies. Now, as we're sitting here on Friday afternoon recording this podcast, it seems like both those vacancies have been filled, and there might be more. We'll talk about that here in a second. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you feel about the job Pruitt has done filling those vacancies, because we first had the news come out that on Tuesday, I believe it was, Tuesday evening, that Jay Graham, former Tennessee great running back, current Texas A&M co-offense coordinator, running backs coach, was going to be hired as Tennessee's next running backs coach, and then Tennessee officially announces it on Thursday? Yeah, on Thursday, because Wednesday night, Jay Graham put out the tweet that he's happy to be home, and then Tennessee officially announces the hire on Thursday, and Graham is now Tennessee's running backs coach. Coming back again, he coached running backs once before. In 2012, he was a GA back in 2005, I believe, for Tennessee, not long after his NFL career was over, so this is his third stint at Tennessee after his playing career has ended. And then today, this morning, just a few hours before we hit record here, reports coming out that Joe Osovet, who's been an off-field analyst for Tennessee for a while, and he's the director of football programming, I believe is what his title was this year. He got a little bit of a promotion last offseason. He's going to be promoted to an on-the-field role as tight ends coach. If you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Tennessee already has a tight ends coach. That's because Brian Niedermeyer looks like he's going to go move to defense. And I like the moves. I'll explain why in a second. I have a feeling you'll probably hit on a lot of the points I'm going to make, or was going to make too. But Ben, how do you feel about these changes, the coaching staff changes? Do you feel Jay Graham, I think we can both agree Jay Graham's an upgrade, but do you think Tennessee as a whole, looking at the staff they had at the end of the 2019 season to the staff they currently have now, do you feel like Tennessee has made significant progress and made upgrades across the board?
I do. I like all three moves. And I don't think I'm saying that simply because I'm a Tennessee fan. This time of year, kind of whichever move is made by every school across the country, it is viewed as a good move. For example, you go back to last season after Jim Chaney takes the offensive coordinator job at Tennessee and James Coley is promoted to the offensive coordinator at Georgia. Everybody in the SEC, in terms of media members and then all Georgia fans, and obviously Georgia included the actual football team, they thought that was a great move, that they would not miss a beat with Jim Chaney moving on to Tennessee. That turned out not to be the case, and we can even use a Tennessee example. I wasn't purposefully trying to pick on Georgia. It's in my mind, but even with Tennessee, when Kevin Beard was hired going into Butch Jones's last season, everybody promoted that move as well. It's just, I don't think it's simply, the media trying to hype somebody up for their own personal gain. I just think it's hard to be negative this time of the year. I mean, Mike DeBoard was viewed as a positive move in the offseason. Hiring Walt Wells was viewed as a positive move in the offseason. Tyson Helton was viewed as a positive move in the offseason. So when I say that I really like these hires, I think I truly like them, and I'm not just saying that I like them simply because I am a Tennessee guy. I think when you look at moving from the trio of Kevin Shearer, David Johnson, Brian Niedermeyer as tight ends coach to, Brian Niedermeyer as the inside linebackers coach, Joe Osovet as the tight ends coach, and then you bring in Jay Graham. I think moving from the previous trio to the current trio is an upgrade. I don't think it's leaps and bounds better than what it was, but I didn't necessarily have a high opinion on Kevin Shearer. Not that I had like a negative opinion on him. Mm-hmm. I just don't. Maybe it's because I wasn't, a part of the football program, but from the outside looking in, you couldn't see a tangible positive effect or a blueprint as to how Kevin Shearer helped improve the Tennessee football team. I mean, I'm sure he did, but again, from the outside looking in, you couldn't tell like you could with Derek Ansley or Jim Chaney or T. Martin or Jeremy Pruitt as a head coach, in my opinion, or like Tracy Rocker with the defensive line and Chris Rumph with the outside linebackers. Sure, Rocker and Rumph aren't necessarily recruiting their heads off, but you can't deny that each of their first two seasons, the defensive line and the outside linebackers got better as the year went along. So I don't think that Kevin Shearer is as huge of a loss as many think. In fact, I think Brian Niedermeyer will be an upgrade at the inside linebackers coach position over him, not because of recruiting reasons, but from a pure coaching ability. And again, I'm not trying to downgrade Kevin Shearer or anything or slander Kevin Shearer, but Brian Niedermeyer behind the scenes is viewed as a highly regarded up-and-coming defensive coach and one of the very few defensive coaches that truly understands each level of Jeremy Pruitt's defense. There are a handful of coaches and people who understand Jeremy Pruitt's defense at each level, at each position, and can coach each level of the defense. And Brian Niedermeyer is viewed as one of those coaches who can do just that. So I think it is going to be a tremendous upgrade. I think being on the defensive side of the ball from a coaching standpoint is where Brian Niedermeyer belongs. I think he is a very good coach that hasn't had the opportunity to show that yet, just because Tennessee and coaching the tight ends was his first on-field coaching position. So now I think he's going to be able to match his recruiting ability to his coaching ability with him moving to inside linebackers coach. And then, Jay Graham, I don't think it's a huge upgrade over David Johnson because I think both are going to recruit at a pretty equal level. I think both are going to relate to the players at an equal level. I think Swain hit the nail on the head on Wednesday or Thursday when we talked about it on the show. The reason why I view it, and I agree with Swain, I'm still in Swain's point, but I do agree with him. The reason it's the slightest of upgrades is because not necessarily that he's a former Tennessee running back, but just that he's a former former running back in general. He's played the position. He'll be able to tell Tennessee's running backs things that David Johnson or Chris Winkie may not be able to, not because those guys just aren't a good running backs coach, but just because it's different when you played that position. It truly is. Even if you've been around football like David Johnson has, you haven't lived being a running back in the SEC, whereas Jay Graham has. So I think that's why it's the slightest of upgrades there at the running back position. And then with Joe Osovet, he's a brilliant offensive mind, and he will finally be able to put that to the test. So maybe it is an upgrade at the tight end position over Niedermeyer just because Osovet is highly regarded as a brilliant offensive mind. The question with Osovet will obviously be, can he handle recruiting? And I think he'll be able to. There's a couple of recruits in the 2021 class, next year's class, that he has really been able to get in with in the D.C. area, most notably the four-star quarterback, Christian Valou. I think that's how you say his last name. I apologize if I'm butchering it. But overall, I like the moves. And I think it's at minimum, it's a slight upgrade over what Tennessee had. Now, I'll be interested to see when this is announced officially. I don't think Jeremy Pruitt wanted the news out as early as it came out, because Joe Ossovet was reported to be the tight ends coach before it was even mentioned that Brian Niedermeyer was moving to the defensive side of the ball. So one domino fell out of order, and so I don't know whether Jeremy Pruitt liked that or not. But regardless, I think it's a great move for Tennessee.
I really like the moves. I know you're not pulling out somebody from another SEC school. Obviously, Graham is, but you're not bringing in someone to coach linebackers out of another school or has a big track record of being an elite linebackers coach. But I really think Brian Niedermeyer, you look at his track record at Tennessee, this was his first on-field position, as you said, but it's only the second time in his coaching career that he's coached the offensive side of the ball. The other time was when he's at a Division III school. I think it was East Texas Baptist, I think was the name of the school. But it was a Division III school. He was a wide receivers coach. Every other place he's been at, Arkansas Pine Bluff, at Miami, at Georgia, at Alabama, when he's been an analyst or a volunteer or a graduate assistant or whatever, he's worked with the defensive side of the ball. And specifically at Miami and Georgia and Alabama, he specifically worked with linebackers. And he worked with Pruitt at Georgia in 2015, and then obviously with Pruitt at Alabama in 2016 and 2017. Pruitt's mentioned several times before about how he thinks Niedermeyer can coach any position really, and coach any side of the ball, or do anything. I like that move. I think the attitude that Niedermeyer has is going to fit him really well with the linebacker room. We'll see if he coaches inside or outside, because as we'll get to here in a second, there could be some more staff changes still happening for Tennessee between now and National Signing Day, or now and the beginning of spring practices. But regardless of which part of the linebacking group he's coaching, I think Niedermeyer's attitude really is going to fit in. For watching him on the practice field with the tight ends and stuff, he's a fiery personality. He gets along well with the players and recruits. That's why he's an ace recruiter. That's why he was the 2019 Recruiter of the Year. He has a personality that players really just get along with and really like. I think he'll do a really good. I think he'll do a good job. I don't want to say really good, because we have not seen him at the Division I level really be a position coach. He's been an assistant. He's been a graduate assistant with the linebackers and defensive and stuff on the defensive side of the ball. We've not seen him do it as an actual just position coach. We've seen him do it at tight ends, and tight ends were they're okay for Tennessee the past couple of seasons. They weren't great, but that's I don't think Niedermeyer had a ton to work with. Dominic Wood Anderson had a lot of potential, but I don't know that the shortcomings of Wood Anderson, I wouldn't place it necessarily on Niedermeyer or Chaney. I put that maybe a little bit more on Wood Anderson, but he's got the physical tools, and we'll see if he can develop into something a little better in the NFL, because I do think he'll get a shot there. But I do like the move to Ossovet. I think Ossovet was kind of a necessity for Tennessee if they wanted to keep him. I don't think they would have been able to keep him on the staff as an off-field analyst again for another season. I think he was really looking for a chance to get an on-field role. I think last year he kind of wanted to get an on-field role, and Tennessee it just didn't work out, because Tennessee, in my opinion, made some really massive upgrades last year with getting Jim Chaney, T. Martin, Derek Ansley. But I think this year, I don't know if Tennessee would have been able to have kept Joe Ossovet on the team if not for letting him, promoting him to an on-the-field role. And I think it's a good move. He's a guy who, when he was a head coach in the junior college ranks at Nassau Community College and at ASA in New York, his offenses were electric. They averaged over 35 points a game every single season he was head coach, and I think twice averaged over 40 points a game. That's a junior college level, but that's it's a step ahead. That's a step up of high school, and in junior college is kind of you could I guess equate it to a Division III, Division II style of play and kind of quality of play a lot of times. So he has a really good offensive mind. We'll see how he does as a position coach, and I think he's going to do a really good job recruiting. He's been pivotal with Tennessee, getting a lot of junior college guys. Obviously, it's kind of the area of expertise that he's brought in to help with. But I've noticed multiple kids who I've talked to here and done interviews with for RTI, who are recruiting partners at VR2. They've done interviews with other recruits and stuff. We've talked about Joe Ossovet being the guy who offered him, being the guy who contacted them, being the guy who they talked with on their visits and stuff. He's built up a lot of relationships with guys who Tennessee has signed, with guys who Tennessee is currently pursuing. There was a 4-star the other day, a 4-star offensive lineman who specifically tagged Joe Ossovet in his tweet when he said thanks for got an offer from Tennessee, and said thanks to at Joe Ossovet. So he's a guy that I think there's a lot of questions about his recruiting, what he can do. I actually think he'll be a really good recruiter. I'm not going to say he's going to be a Niedermeyer or T. Martin level, but I think he's a really good recruiter. And Jay Graham, my thoughts on Jay Graham are that he is and I wrote about it on our site in an article. I think Jay Graham is an absolute home run hire. I think, we both agree. We both like David Johnson as a running backs coach. We both like David Johnson as a person, as a recruiter, as a coach in general. I think he's really good. And I think if he was going to move on, you're going to have to replace him. I don't know that you could have found anyone better. I would have been, it'd been fine if they brought in Montero Hardesty and they liked to kind of go bigger money on the defensive side of the ball or something else. And I think Hardesty he's an up and coming coach. I think he could have done a good job. He obviously played at a high level at Tennessee. He's young enough to relate to the guys like Niedermeyer is. But man, Graham is one of the, at least in my lifetime, he's one of the greatest running backs to ever play at Tennessee. I can't speak as much for the Cobbs and the Webbs of the days because I wasn't alive back then, but just from watching them on film, that they were obviously very, 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 very good and one of the best. But in my lifetime, the past 27 years or so, Jay Graham is one of the best running backs that's ever played at Tennessee, and he played at a high level. He knows what it means to be a Tennessee Volunteer. That alone makes him uniquely qualified. Doesn't mean he's going to be a good coach, but he is a good coach. I mean, his track record, to me, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better track record for a running backs coach in college football right now. There are probably a couple that maybe would be a better track record, but he's coached 5 different running backs to 1,000-yard seasons. 3 different running backs under his tutelage have set some sort of school record. I think since 2013, he's had 6 running backs get drafted into the NFL. So really, I think essentially every year, since he's been a running backs coach since 2013, he's had a guy get drafted into the NFL. I mean, Marcus Lattimore would have had an even more phenomenal career at South Carolina if not for injuries, because his freshman season was really good. He got injured his sophomore year. Then obviously his junior year was the year Graham was at Tennessee the first time in 2012, and then he had that just awful season-ending injury that he actually suffered against Tennessee. But it's not even just the individual accolades of the guys he's coached, like Dalvin Cook and Cam Akers and Devonta Freeman and Marcus Lattimore. I look at other guys, like there was, I think it's Carlos Williams is who I'm thinking of, that was a defensive back that he took from Florida State and transformed him into a really good running back and a future NFL running back. You look what he did at Texas A&M in his first year there. Trayvon Williams was, had a good career, had a little bit of a drop off his sophomore season. I think in his first 2 years, it had 1,800 rushing yards total. He doubled his stats across the board. In Jay Graham's first year, he was the SEC leading rusher in 2018. He nearly totaled 2,000 yards from scrimmage in that 2018 season. And then last year, Texas A&M got dealt just a really bad hand at running back. Their starter, Jashaun Corbin, who was a one-time Tennessee commit, suffered a season-ending injury early in the year. They had another guy before the season even began suffer a career-ending injury. Corbin and then another guy went into the transfer portal. Really, you were counting on 1 or maybe 2 backs for Texas A&M all season, and one of them was a freshman, and Isaiah Spiller, and he did a good job. He almost got 1,000 yards. He got over 1,100 yards of total offense on the season. He led the SEC in rushing yards for freshmen. I really like Jay Graham as a recruiter, as a coach. I don't think you could have done any better if you're Pruitt. And I think he was an absolute, just knocked it out of the park, home run hire for the staff. And now it's interesting to see, Ben, that this staff you've got 2 former Vols who played at a high level at Tennessee in T. Martin and Jay Graham. You've got Derek Ansley and Jim Chaney and Jay Graham, who were all on the same coaching staff in 2012. You've got Philip Fulmer, obviously former national championship winning head coach, as your AD. This is probably, I would say, at least in my lifetime, because I don't, I'm trying to remember all the assistant coaches and stuff that Fulmer had back in the day. But I'd say probably in our lifetimes, Ben, at least since we've been adults and stuff too, this is probably the most orange blood that Tennessee's had on a coaching staff in our lifetimes, at least from when you and I really, started following football. I can't think of another time where there's been more orange blood on Tennessee's coaching staff than they have right now.
Yeah, and as a Tennessee fan, you love to see it. But more importantly, they have good quality coaches that are former Vols. They're just not, bringing on former Vols just for the sake of bringing on former Vols. T. Martin is one of the best wide receiver coaches in the country. He has the potential to be one of the best recruiters in the country. We've seen him do it in the past. Hasn't necessarily been at Tennessee long enough to establish the relationships and have a huge impact on recruiting like he did at USC, but I think that we'll see that this year. He's been on campus for a year now. It will be a year and a half by the time the season rolls around. That's plenty of time to develop relationships with top players, and I think you'll really see across the state of Tennessee in this upcoming class, he will get some big time targets to commit. I truly believe that. So even though Tennessee hasn't felt the impact of T. Martin and his recruiting ability yet, I do think that is coming around the corner, and we at least know he has the potential to be, on top of him being just a terrific coach, a wide receiver coach, and the players love him too. That's the most important part. The players relate to him, as is the case with Jay Graham. So yeah, it's really nice to see so many Tennessee players, former Tennessee players, not even former Tennessee players, but former Tennessee greats, just be involved in the program. That's how it should be. If they're qualified and capable, Tennessee should always take care of its own. That should always be the case. And another name that I'll mention, two other names that are kind of behind the scenes. Mickey Allen, who is the technically the VFL director. I think they changed the exact title, but he is instrumental behind the scenes in working with the players and setting things up. And then Chris Walker, former Tennessee defensive end, who works with both the basketball team and the football team. Not even really just basketball and football specific. He's really helping out with Tennessee athletics overall, but we see him a lot with both basketball programs. I see him at every single basketball practice, and he's always so kind. Ask how I'm doing, ask how Swain's doing. But he has that type of impact on the football players, the basketball team, the softball team, baseball team, whatever athlete on campus. He is making sure that they are good mentally, that they are good spiritually. So we have coaches on the field. We have important former Vols behind the scenes. The athletic director is as much of a Tennessee Vol as it comes. So I think for me personally, it's nice having all these former Vols back just because there are so many Alabama people on campus. And me being from Alabama, I'm driving to Alabama right now, literally about to cross into the state of Alabama as we speak, driving through the other side of Chattanooga, back to Huntsville, where I went to high school, where my parents are. I get ribbed all the time about Alabama-Tennessee stuff, and it doesn't matter if Tennessee loses to Alabama in women's tennis. I can assure you that I am going to get a text message from my buddies who I went to high school with. So with Jeremy Pruitt and all of these other Alabama folks who are a part of Tennessee's football program, it's nice to have a mix of former Vols getting things done. So, and that doesn't mean that I'm just completely opposed to Alabama people being involved with Tennessee football. I don't care where you're from as long as you help Tennessee win. I would prefer for you to be a Tennessean, but I'm not going to hold it against you if you're from Florida or Georgia or Alabama. If you can help Tennessee win, then come on. But it does make it makes winning sweeter when they are former Vols. And as much as I just talked up T. Martin, and maybe this is a conversation for a different day, I will be interested to see how long he stays at Tennessee. Not because he's just like unhappy at Tennessee or anything, but his goals, his professional goals, they don't align with what is available at Tennessee right now. So over the last month or so, I think the one thing that I've come to realize and learn is that T. Martin as wide receivers coach and passing game coordinator, I think it's going to be a shorter tenure than we expected, simply because T. Martin wants to call plays, and Jim Chaney's not going anywhere anytime soon. So I don't see T. Martin being able to move up at Tennessee just because Jim Chaney is in the way. And unfortunately for T, Jim Chaney's not going anywhere. Jim Chaney's not going to relinquish play calling duties, and nor should he. Jim Chaney is one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. So don't be surprised if you see T. Martin move next offseason or the offseason after, just because his career goals don't align with what Tennessee has open right now. And I won't blame T. Martin one bit for going out there and trying to get an offensive coordinator job. And personally, I hope to see T. Martin as the head coach at Tennessee one day. And what's going to help him be the head coach at Tennessee one day is going out being an offensive coordinator, being successful doing that like he was at USC, doing that again, getting a head coaching job, and then succeeding there, and then when the time comes, him coming back to Rocky Top and being head coach. I think that would be really cool. That is something that I would love to see. So that's a completely different conversation, but something to keep an eye on moving forward over the next year or two, in my opinion.
One last thing here on the football before we kind of transition briefly to basketball at the end of the podcast. We may not be done seeing coaching staff changes for Tennessee. Right now, I think it's just Tracy Rocker and Chris Weinke. I don't think Chris Rumph, but at least Rocker and Weinke, they're as we're recording this, Ben, their contracts at Tennessee are set to expire today. It's been policy so far under Pruitt that unless you're a coordinator, if you're an assistant coach, you sign a 2-year deal. The coordinators have signed 3-year deals under Pruitt so far, but their 2-year deals when they first came on Tennessee, both Rocker and Weinke, set to expire. That either means, if they're expired today, we don't hear anything about anything happening. That either means that they've signed something, behind the scenes and they're still on contract and everything's good, or they've already moved on. We haven't heard announcement either way. So if we don't hear news today later on about it, that doesn't mean that they're out there recruiting and doing stuff, not under contract. That means that they've either signed a contract and it just hasn't been released yet, because that's the thing that's happened at Tennessee before. It's a thing that's happened at Georgia. It's a thing that's happened at a bunch of schools. Kind of keep that contract information sometimes under lock and key and don't let people know about it until later on. Or it could mean that one of them or both of them have moved on. Do you think we see either of these guys move on? Because I'm under the impression that I think Chris Weinke is going to stay on staff, but it would not shock me if we saw, to me, in my opinion, it wouldn't shock me if we saw Rocker or Rumph move on. And I think it'd be interesting, because I think Rocker did a really good job coaching up the defensive line both years he's been here. He helped Shai Tuttle and Kyle Phillips, and I'm struggling to remember who the other guy was that was starting for Tennessee in 2018, but he helped that defensive line kind of come into their own a little bit and kind of realize a little bit more of their potential, more than what they'd had in 2016, 2017. In this past season, he took a bunch of, we don't want to say nobodies, but he took a bunch of guys that we hadn't really played a whole lot, especially after Emmett Gooden went down with injury, and Tennessee's defensive line was pretty serviceable this year. They weren't top half of the SEC, but they were, I think, better than a lot of us were expecting them to be. So I think Rocker's interesting because I think he's a good on-field coach and a good developer. To me, it's been his recruiting that's kind of put him up in the air. If he'd recruited a little bit better, if he had been able to nab some of these top-tier defensive linemen that Tennessee's been after, it'd be a little different. That's not all on him. He's not the only one who gets the blame for that, but he is the position coach, so he's been kind of the lead recruiter on some of those guys. But, I think that's the biggest question with him, is the recruiting. I think on-field coach-wise, he's a really good coach. I just don't know about recruiting. So do you think we see another change or two announced anytime between now and National Signing Day, or now and the beginning of spring practices?
Before spring practice, yes. I have not heard anything about Chris Weinke going elsewhere, or job, or being demoted, or something along those lines. So I would be surprised as of today if Chris Weinke took a different job or was demoted. Things could obviously change, and it may happen. But as of today, I'd be surprised if Chris Weinke isn't Tennessee's quarterbacks coach next year. With Tracy Rocker and Chris Rumph, those are the two guys that I am keeping my eye on for the time being. I know that Weinke's contract expires today, technically, Friday, January 31st. But, again, there just has not been any talk. At least I have not heard any talk of him moving on or switching to a different role. But there has been chatter about Tracy Rocker and Chris Rumph really the last couple of months. And I would be surprised if Tracy Rocker is Tennessee's defensive line coach next year. I think we'll see him maybe move to a different role, not necessarily leave, but move to a different role. And with Chris Rumph, I think it's TBD. I think it's kind of up in the air. Now, he did sign a 3-year contract when he first came on board, because the assistant coaches got 2-year contracts and the coordinators got 3-year deals. And last year, Chris Rumph was the co-defensive coordinator, so he is on a 3-year deal. So if he leaves, it's going to be up to him. If he just doesn't want to work here anymore, if he wants to move on to what he deems greener pastures, it'll kind of be up to him. I don't see Jeremy Pruitt pushing him to leave. I think that'll be a Chris Rumph decision if he does decide to leave. So that's kind of my feel on the situation. We'll definitely see some more movement before National Signing, or not before National Signing Day, before spring practice. I just don't know when it will happen. It may happen before signing day. It may happen a week after signing day. Whoever knows. But it will definitely happen before spring practice. I mean, that's a month and a half away. So that is plenty of time. And plus, you don't want changes going on kind of as spring practice is beginning. So there's going to be some more changes. It's just a matter of when, and if it's going to be Chris Winkie and Tracy, or Chris Winkie and Chris Rumph as well.
Well, Ben, let's close out the podcast here and talk some basketball. A little bit of a downer note to kind of end the podcast on, at least how Tennessee's playing right now. We were a little, I won't say excited, but we saw positives. I think the last podcast we did was before Tennessee took on Kansas. It was, but we saw positives from the Kansas game, even though it was a loss. Tennessee, made some good strides. We saw a lot from, obviously, Eve Pons had a career game. Fulgerson put in another double-double. Santiago Vescovia had a good game. Bowden had an electric second half of that game. There were things that we took away from it saying, hey, there's positives, and there's things Tennessee obviously still needs to work on, but this should give Tennessee some momentum and something they can build off of for the rest of the SEC schedule. And then Tennessee comes out and just absolutely lays an egg against Texas A&M and loses a game they had no business losing. You look at all of Tennessee's other losses, their other 7 teams they've lost to this year, and they're all quality teams. The lowest rated team that Tennessee lost to this season, at least on the Ken Pomeroy rankings, before Texas A&M, was Georgia, and they're a top 100 team still. I think they're like 98th. Every other team, Memphis, Cincinnati, FSU, Kansas, all of them. Kansas actually number 1 in Ken Pomeroy, but all these other teams were top 60 teams in the Ken Pomeroy rankings. So Tennessee hadn't had a bad loss all year. I mean, obviously the way they lost to certain of those teams, the 20-point loss to Wisconsin and getting blown out on the road by Georgia, those are bad, but they hadn't lost to a bad team all year. Granted, Texas A&M's played better since they've gotten to the SEC play, but that was brutal. I mean, the way they got just manhandled on the boards. I mean, Texas A&M finished the game statistically with more offensive rebounds than Tennessee had total rebounds. And I know Rick Barnes talked about on Thursday that he went back and watched the film, and it wasn't all 23 weren't all just Tennessee being beat. Some of those were balls being knocked out of bounds by Tennessee. That counts as an offensive board for A&M. A couple of them were Tennessee actually playing good defense and switching, and is leaving it on the shooter and leaving a guy kind of open to get a rebound. But his point was that it was still about 13, 14 offensive boards Tennessee left, but that's still too many, and Tennessee has addressed it, and they're going to try to move on and get better from it. But that was kind of the last. I mean, you still play Vanderbilt, and you still play South Carolina, and for Tennessee, those are wins you should be able to pick up. But this game against Texas A&M was kind of the last game where Tennessee had a chance to rack up some wins in SEC play to help them down the stretch, because you've got Mississippi State upcoming, who's a good team, who's a top 40 team, I think, in the Ken Pomeroy, and then they're playing like a team that's trying to play their way onto the bubble with Reggie Perry, who's a really, really good player for them. He's a potential SEC Player of the Year candidate. You've got dates against Alabama and Kentucky upcoming. You're going to play Arkansas twice. You're going to play Auburn twice, I believe, or at least once at the end of the season. And obviously play Kentucky again, too. You're going to play Florida at the end of the season. I mean, we're now at the stretch now, Ben, where this is the hard part of the schedule. This is the part where Tennessee it's gut check time. Do you believe Tennessee has it within them at certainly currently 12-8 right now overall, and I think 4-3 in SEC play? Do you think they have it within them to muster up some kind of run to finish this year like an 18-13 or something like that to get themselves firmly back onto the bubble conversation and to maybe make a run to the NCAA tournament? Or do you think this is just a team that they'll get to the NIT and then maybe win a couple games there, but this is just going to be a down year overall? It's going to be, we all knew it was going to be a rebuilding year, but the season's also taken a lot of twists and turns we didn't foresee, back in like September and October. So do you think Tennessee has it in them to put together enough of a run to end this regular season and I guess the SEC tournament too, to get to the NCAA tournament?
They have it in them. I just don't see it happening. I don't think this team is consistent enough on the offensive end to pull off a mighty stretch here against good teams. They've already played the weak teams in the conference, and so now They weren't really able to take advantage of that with losing to Georgia, losing to Texas A&M. They weren't able to really take advantage of that. And now you have to face Auburn twice. You have to face South Carolina again. You have to face Arkansas. You have to face Kentucky twice. Mississippi State this weekend, and improved Alabama team. You do get Vanderbilt again, but, I mean, that's one game. And so they haven't really positioned themselves well to make a stretch down the run. It's just too late in the season to be this inconsistent on offense for me to believe that they can really make a run here and make the NCAA tournament. They can. They do have the ability and the talent to do it, but I just don't see the offense being good enough on a consistent basis against these good teams to really make a run. So hopefully they prove me wrong, but I just don't see it at this point in the year. They haven't played consistently enough on the offensive end to make me a believer that they can go on a nice run against good teams down the stretch and make the tournament.
It does help for Tennessee that you have currently, looking at the SEC standings, it's a logjam. You have 6 teams with 4-3 records in conference play, and you have 8 total who are 5-2, 4-3, or 3-4. So you have 8 teams with all within that, kind of 2 games of each other in the conference standings. And one of those is Arkansas, who I think is a very good team. They're 3-4 in conference play. I mean, that's a little weird and baffling to me that they're 3-4. Right now, LSU, Kentucky are kind of the top 2, and Auburn's had 2 kind of bad losses in conference play as well. But you're going to play Tennessee. You're going to play a couple teams here who are right there with them. If Tennessee beats Mississippi State, for example, they will jump ahead of them in the conference standings because both teams are 4-3 in SEC play. Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, and Florida are all 12-8 overall. I mean, that's I haven't seen the SEC. I mean, it's not like it's horrible. It's not like I remember back when I was in college when Conza Martin was head coach and Missouri and A&M first joined the SEC. The SEC was just downright bad back then. I mean, you even had a bad Kentucky team one of those years. I'm trying to remember what year it was that Tennessee blew Kentucky out by 30 points after they lost Nerlens Noel for the season. But I mean, back then the SEC was just bad. This year they're not. There are some bad teams. Vanderbilt's not good. Ole Miss is not really that great either. But I don't think as a whole the SEC is bad. I think it's pretty top heavy for, I guess, what I would say, because I think Kentucky and LSU are obviously kind of the top 2 teams right now, and I think Auburn is probably the third. They've had some games where you're like, what's going on here? But I think they're probably third. But man, like I said, you have 8 teams there really that are just like you don't know what you're going to get from them night in and night out. It's an inconsistent bunch. It's a got teams who can put together a run, but it's also teams who, I mean, like Tennessee, they can go out and play really well against Kansas. They can go out earlier in the season and beat a Washington and beat a VCU, but then just get mauled by Wisconsin and then get destroyed by Georgia. Georgia has been, they're the perfect example of this. They were a team that just killed Tennessee, and then they've suffered some just bizarre losses to Missouri and just weird losses that, you're sitting there thinking, now how is this the same team that crushed Tennessee by nearly 20 points in Athens? So, in the same time, though, you look at Tennessee, how is that the same team that gave Kansas all they wanted, in Lawrence, and then went out and just, I mean, I don't know, they just played poorly against Texas A&M. And I think the conversation you and Swain had earlier this week, I would agree with you on this one, Ben. I think Tennessee more lost that game than Texas A&M won it, because Tennessee's a better team. Tennessee played bad. I mean, Texas A&M wasn't playing good either. That was the thing. Texas A&M didn't play a good game, yet they still won because Tennessee just played worse and did not do a good job, on the blocking out and rebounding and whatnot. And I think what you pointed out in your observations piece was you also had shot selection issues where they need to work the offense more inside. They're doing a little bit better of a job than they were, a few weeks ago. But Fulkerson and Pons need to be the guys who are getting the majority of the touches. Bowden, he's been better when he's not been the main scoring option. Look at Kansas. He wasn't the leading scorer. He obviously torched them in the second half. But he had Yves Pons and he had John Fulkerson. He could dish the ball to, and that they could help him with scoring. Bowden's not going to be. We've learned that this year. He's not going to be the guy who you're going to be counting on to be a leading scorer game in and game out. But if he has a mentality of, hey, I can help out, I can be the second, third option, it just seems to relieve a lot of that pressure off of him, and he plays better. He plays more loose. He plays with more aggression. He plays, the way he's capable of playing. So I think you've made this point earlier this week too on Swain's show. I think Tennessee's offense needs to start working more in the post. And they've been doing that a little bit more because we haven't seen games where Fulkerson's only getting 2 or 3 shots again like he had kind of earlier in the year. I think Pons and Fulkerson need to be Tennessee's leading scorers for the rest of the season. And obviously Bowden can lead them scoring here and there. And I think Vescovi will probably have some good offensive games too. But I think those two are what Tennessee's offense and defense need to run through, because Bowden's obviously a very good defender. But Tennessee doesn't have a lot of post presence, so I think having Fulkerson and Pons be your post defenders too is going to help. And maybe Pruitt. Barnes mentioned, and you have the video up on our YouTube channel, Ben, that Barnes mentioned on Thursday when he met with the media that it's on him for getting guys like Camwa and Pember and Plavsic more playing time. He's just got to play them, and I understand his reasoning for not playing them because they've been a lot of times live, not necessarily Pember, I guess, but Camwa and Plavsic specifically have kind of been liabilities on the court when they've been out there. Camwa, with the exception of Tennessee's win, oh gosh, I can't remember who they played now, but their win before they took on Kansas, he looked good in that game. He looked confident. He wasn't playing like a freshman in that game. But then he came out against Kansas and against Texas A&M, and he looked like a freshman again. He looked nervous. He looked like the head, the seam was too big for him. The stage was too big. He looked like a deer in the headlights. And Plavsic's just been a disappointment. I mean, just is what it is. And granted, I'm not going to be too hard on him. This is his first time he's played basketball at the college level because he sat out his first year at Arizona State. He hasn't played since he was in high school at Hamilton Heights. So I'm not going to be too hard on him, but he has been a disappointment so far. So I'm with you, but I think they have it in them. It's just unfortunate for them now that this is also the toughest part of their schedule coming up, and it's not even close. I mean, their non-conference schedule is tough, for sure. But what they're about to face here over the next, I guess, month and a half or so before the end of the regular season is not going to be easy. I look at the schedule and I see maybe 3 wins for Tennessee from just kind of what I would expect, and that's not good because that would get you 15 wins and you'd be around I guess 15 or 15 to 16 mark. That would not be good. So I think Tennessee can probably get more than 3 wins, but it's not looking very good right now for Tennessee, and it's just a team they're going to be up and down. We felt good about them a couple weeks ago, or even a week ago, and then they lay an egg against Texas A&M, and then watch, maybe they'll go out and play really well and beat Mississippi State, or they'll go out and play really well and beat Alabama. I don't know. This team's been really hard to figure out. They've actually played a little better on the road sometimes this year than they have at home. So we'll see. But, Ben, I agree with you. I think they have it in them. I just don't feel very confident in their ability to do so because they've not played consistently enough on offense. And this is the schedule. It's getting tough at the wrong time for Tennessee. They're finally starting to get a little more used to the guys they have on the roster now because there hasn't been a change on the roster in a couple weeks finally for Tennessee. They're starting to normalize a little bit, but they're getting to the meat of the schedule now. So, but that'll do it for our podcast here. We really appreciate you guys listening. As I mentioned on the top of the show, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Android phones, we're on YouTube as well. You can follow us on all social media. Just search Rocky Top Insider on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can find us everywhere. You can follow me and Ben on Twitter as well. He's Ben McKee14. I am at Mr._Rutherford. So follow us on there as well. Thank you all for listening, and signing off for Ben, I'm Nathaniel, and this has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.